All right. Good morning, everybody. We'll wait just a minute here and let people pop on. Appreciate you joining this morning. All right, everybody. I think we'll get started with the introduction here and we'll let people join here as we go. Again, appreciate everybody taking the time this morning. My name is Travis Wood. I'm with the Missouri Public Transit Association. Welcome to our MPTA Education Series training session on passenger transportation DOT compliance. And this is specifically for 5311, 5307 program providers. And we are lucky to have Matthew Kiefer with MoDOT, Motor Vehicle Services, to provide today's training. Just a quick little background on Matt. He's in his 8th year as the Safety and Compliance Motor Carrier Services Program Manager. In that role, Matt manages the investigation supervisors across the state of Missouri and oversees the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's new Entrance Safety Audit Program, state safety and compliance medical exemption, case settlement, and state investigations programs. So today's a great opportunity to get your questions answered and take a deep dive into the DOT Missouri Operator Authority regulations. As a reminder, this is a 2-hour training session. We will be recording it and sharing that recording with everybody afterwards for you to use as a resource. If you have questions along the way, you can enter those in the chat or the Q&A function, and we will get to those as time allows. And if we don't have time to get to those or all of them, we'll definitely follow up with that information. So with that, Matt, I will let you take it away.
All right, thank you, Travis. I appreciate the introduction and I appreciate the opportunity to present today. Sincerely want to thank all you folks for being on here today. I know your time is precious. The fact that you're here to give up 2 hours of your day is a testament to your interest in safety, and I do appreciate that. As Travis said, this is 2 hours. We do have quite a bit of content to go over. I just want to let you know that when this is done today, that's not the end. I welcome any feedback, questions. You're going to have this slide deck. At the last slide on this PowerPoint presentation has my contact information, my phone number, my email address. Do not hesitate to reach out. I'll be brutally honest. This is quite a bit of information to digest in a short amount of time. The DOT regulations can be very complicated and convoluted, and there's several exemptions that make it even the water's even muddier. So all that to say, I expect you to reach out to me. I've done a few of these presentations, not quite as deep dive as this one is, but I did a few high level back in March for some transit providers. And I've gotten quite a bit of questions already from them, some of which I've actually learned from myself. So without further ado, let's get into the content. If you do have questions throughout, go ahead and plug them into the chat or the Q&A. If time allows, hopefully we'll have time. I'm not sure we will because we've got a lot to cover, but I will get to those. If we don't have time, I will send up a follow-up email to get all those answered for you. So what we're going to go over today is these topics right here. First, we got to define what a commercial motor vehicle is. That's what gets you into the DOT safety regulations. And then we're going to talk about when is a US DOT number required. I think that's been caused quite a bit of confusion in the past from talking to Christy Evers with multimodal over transit. We're going to get that cleared up once and for all today. What type of operator's license do you need? Not all commercial motor vehicles require a CDL, so we're going to get into that. Drug and alcohol testing. For 5311, 5307, you guys are under the FTA drug and alcohol requirements, which is similar to Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, but there are some differences. We're going to go over an accident register. What is it? What accidents are required to be recorded? And what has to be on it? Driver qualifications, including what documents you have to have on each driver that drives your vehicles. Hours of service, which that's our way of saying how many hours can a driver be on duty, drive before they have to take some time off. And then finally, we're going to talk about vehicle maintenance files, pre-trip, post-trip inspection, and federal annual inspections, which is different from state safety inspections. All right, so right out of the gate here, I don't know if we have any government municipalities on. If you are a municipality, you are exempt from nearly all of the regulations, just like MoDOT. The only thing you're required to comply with is to make sure the driver has a valid operator's license and the drug and alcohol testing requirements. That's it. Everything else you are exempt from. However, you can implement whatever measures you want. If you want to act as though you're fully regulated, that's up to you. But as far as DOT is concerned, the only thing government agencies have to comply with is a valid license and the drug and alcohol testing requirements. Okay, so let's define what a commercial motor vehicle is. Quite simply, from a very high level, any motor vehicle used on road, street, or way open to public travel, transporting passengers or property in commerce that exceeds a specified weight or exceeds a specified passenger seating capacity. Now, there is another layer to this. I'm not going to get into it because it deals with transporting placardable hazmat, which I know nobody on this webinar does that. So we're going to talk about the weight and the passenger capacity that could get you into the threshold of becoming a commercial motor vehicle. So let's talk about the weight first. Let's get some terms out of the way. When it comes to commercial motor vehicles, we look at gross vehicle weight rating, GVWR. That's what the manufacturer puts on the specification plate saying this is the maximum loaded weight this vehicle can handle. Okay, it's designed with suspensions and tires and chassis to support this weight. And then there's also something called a gross vehicle weight, and that's quite simply is just the weight of the vehicle and any passengers on, any luggage on when you pull it up onto a scale. You should be below the GVW. Your GVW should be lower than your GVWR, because if you exceed the GVWR, then you're taxing the vehicle and it's not made to handle that kind of weight. So where do you find this GVWR? This picture right here is typically where you see it on like your shuttle buses. You open up the door jamb, it has the VIN, the make, the model, the year, all kinds of information on there. Somewhere you're going to see something that looks like that. GVWR is what you're looking for. And you want to make sure you're looking at the pounds. This one has 12,500 pounds. Now, it's not always going to be necessarily in that location. It may be on the other side of the door jamb. It may be a little bit above the driver's head, but it should be somewhere around the driver's area. Passenger capacity, that's also going to be somewhere in the door jamb. It'll have, not all vehicles may have this, but if it has a seating capacity, you see this one says 15. If it doesn't have it, you just count the seats. And we count the driver's seat as well on that total. All right, so we talked about GVWR, passenger capacity. So what are these thresholds? If you have a gross vehicle weight rating or a gross vehicle weight that exceeds 10,000 pounds, or it's designed or used to transport 9 or more passengers, counting the driver, for compensation. We're going to get into what compensation here is in a little bit, because that's very important. Designed or used to transport 16 or more passengers, including the driver, regardless of compensation. So if you meet any of those or more than one, then you are a commercial motor vehicle. There's an example of what we see a lot of times, E350. This is probably about 14 or 15 passenger capacity. And based off my experience of inspecting these types of vehicles, they're usually around 12,500, just like what that spec plate showed earlier. So this meets the definition of a commercial motor vehicle, both by passenger capacity and by the weight, assuming they're being compensated. This one right here, these vans, I don't know what the passenger capacity is. I know it's not going to be 16 plus. It's going to be between 9 to 15, right? And I don't know what the GVWR is, but a lot of these are right at 10,000 pounds. So based off of the weight, if it is 10,000 or less, it's not going to be a commercial vehicle based off the weight. It's going to be based off the 9 to 15 passenger capacity if they are being compensated. So let's talk about compensation. And this is something I learned from giving this presentation a couple months ago. Company provide free, and a lot of you probably provide free transportation. You know, you get the FTA grant money and it goes towards your transportation services, and the rides that you offer are free. So we adopt the federal motor carrier safety regulations. The definition of commercial motor vehicle I just went over is their definition that we adopt in our state statute. So I had to reach out to FMCSA to get their guidance on how this applies to you guys. If you're providing free transportation and you're receiving FTA grant money for transportation services, is that considered compensation? That's important because the 9 to 15, 10,000 pounds or less is only a commercial motor vehicle if you are considered compensated. So what they told me was, and this went to DC, and it took about 3 or 4 weeks to get an answer, but I finally got an answer. I'm glad I did so we can clear it up. Their answer was you are considered compensated even if you're providing free transportation, if your FTA grant funds are used exclusively for transportation services. I'm not sure if you'd ever have a situation where you don't use it for transportation services, but they said if your FTA grant funds are put into like a general revenue, then you would not be compensated. So this is why it matters, that middle part right there, 9 passenger or more for compensation. So if you're 10,000 or less, and obviously you're not 16 plus, compensation is critical to get you into the commercial motor vehicle safety regulations. So we're talking about vehicles like this. All right, not to belabor the point, but 9 to 15 at 10,000 pounds or less, you are a commercial motor vehicle, but you do get several exemptions to the regulations. Not as much as government, but you do get several. Well, actually, technically, you probably do because you don't even require a CDL. But I'm going to go over that here in a few slides. But first, I want to get this addressed right out of the gate. Do you need a USDOT number? All right. Quite simply, if you're crossing state lines, some of you might, if you're on the border of Missouri, then you do need a USDOT number no matter what. If you're in Missouri only, generally, if you're for hire, you require intrastate operating authority. You do need a DOT number unless otherwise exempt. Let's talk about that. Missouri has an intrastate exemption that does not require Missouri intrastate operating authority. Therefore, no DOT number is required. If you are transporting property or passengers pursuant to a contract between you guys and the state of Missouri, and the transportation services are paid to the carrier by the state of Missouri. This can be a little bit confusing, and I'm not a lawyer, so I went to my leadership just to get it all clarified and cleared up. And I have a definitive answer that if the primary funding that you're getting for providing transportation services is provided to you by MoDOT, which it is, we are giving you that FTA grant money, then you are considered exempt. You do not need our operating authority in Missouri. Therefore, you do not need a USDOT if you're staying within the state of Missouri. So to put it simply, crossing state lines, yes, you need a USDOT number. Operating point to point in Missouri, you do not need a USDOT number. You can have one, and you may have one now, and that's fine, but it's not required. Okay. I do want to make it clear right now that the safety regulations still apply, even if no USDOT number is required. We have thousands, we don't even know how many, of what we call private carriers operating point to point in Missouri. I'm thinking about construction companies, landscapers, anybody that's just hauling their own equipment, providing a service. They are private. They do not need a USDOT number because they stay within Missouri, but they are still subject to all the DOT safety regulations. So that causes confusion sometimes when people think I don't need a DOT, so nothing applies. That's not true. Okay, so for you folks that do have vehicles that are 9 to 15, less than 10,001, or say 10,000 pounds or less, this is what applies to you. This is the only thing that applies to you. Now, for everyone else, this applies to you as well. You may need something more than a Class E license. You may need a CDL. But for the 9 to 15, less than 10,001, this is all that applies to you because you are exempt from several of the regulations. So at minimum, a Class E license for Missouri drivers. This is also known as a chauffeur's license. It's a step up from the Class F, if you will. It's not a CDL, but it is required if you're operating a vehicle more than just your own for your personal use or recreational use. If you happen to have drivers that are not in Missouri, this is a state statute requirement, so they're not going to be required to get a Missouri Class E. They're just going to have the appropriate license for their state to operate your vehicles. The markings on the vehicle, if you have a DOT number, has to be on both sides of the vehicle, the DOT number along with your legal name or trade name, legible from 50 feet away when the vehicle is stationary. If you do not have a DOT number, and you're not required to have one if you stay within Missouri, state statute still requires your company name to be on the vehicle somewhere in a conspicuous spot. Okay. Maintain an accident register for reportable accidents. I'll get into what that is here a few slides later. Obviously, everyone is prohibited from texting and use of a handheld mobile device unless it's hands-free, basically within reach, and one touch to answer, one touch to hang up. Nope, can't be dialing numbers or anything like that. If you do operate across state lines, you must meet Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration insurance and operating authority requirements and have a US DOT number. So in addition to that US DOT number across the state lines, there is interstate operating authority, which you would not get an exemption from unless you happen to be in the St. Louis, Kansas City area. Then there's something called a commercial zone, which if you have questions about that, we can talk about that. You could be exempt from operating authority, but you still have to have the appropriate amount of insurance on file with FMCSA. If that fits anyone on this current webinar, you can reach out to me afterwards and I can talk to you one-on-one to give you more specifics on that. All right, so that's the 9 to 15, less than 10,001 pounds. That's all you have to comply with. And I'll get into the accident register here in a little bit. Okay, all commercial motor vehicles must comply with safety regulations, including the appropriate operator's license, but not all CMVs require a CDL. So let's talk about what vehicles do require a CDL. This is based on the gross vehicle weight rating, or if you're pulling a trailer, which I doubt if anyone on this call is going to be pulling a trailer with their van or their bus, the gross combination weight rating, you add the weight rating of the vehicle and the trailer together to get that, or just the gross vehicle weight, gross combination weight. Again, placardable hazmat. Nobody on this call, I don't believe, is going to be transporting placardable hazmat. Or if you're just operating a vehicle designed to transport 16 or more passengers, regardless of what the weight is. So that's when CDL comes into play. And the Class A, you're only going to need a Class A CDL if you're pulling a trailer. If you're never pulling a trailer, you're never going to need a Class A CDL. But just so you know, if it's a combination of the power unit, as we say, and the trailer exceeds 26 pounds, and the trailer is 10,000 pounds, more than 10,000 pounds, that's going to require a Class A CDL. Class B, this may apply to some if your gross vehicle weight rating or the gross vehicle weight of just the vehicle itself, the bus, if you have a bigger bus, is 26,001 pounds or more, that's going to require a Class B CDL. And finally, the Class C CDL is if you don't meet the weight requirements of A or B, but you have a vehicle designed to transport 16 or more, counting the driver, of course, that's going to require a Class C CDL. And then we get into hazmat, which isn't going to be applicable to anybody on this call. All right, so along with the CDL, there are some endorsements that may be required specifically for you guys. If you require a B or C CDL, you're going to have that P, the passenger endorsement. So that requires an extra knowledge test when you take your CDL test, along with taking a skills test and a vehicle representative of the vehicle you're going to be driving, a bus or a shuttle bus or what have you. The other endorsements on here, double, triple trailers, tank vehicle, hazmat, combination tank and hazmat, I don't think are ever going to apply to your situation. So the P endorsement is what you got to pay attention to. If you require a CDL, you're transporting passengers, you must have that P endorsement. Of course, school bus endorsement if you operate for school. Below the school bus are restrictions. If you take the CDL skills test with the higher patrol in a vehicle that does not have a manual transmission, which most vehicles do not now, they're usually all automatic, you're going to have an E restriction on that CDL saying you must operate vehicles that are automatic. You cannot operate a manual transmission vehicle. Also, if you have a bigger vehicle that has air brakes and you have an L restriction, that means you took your CDL skills test in a vehicle that does not have air brakes. Therefore, you weren't tested on that. So they're going to put that restriction on there. So if any of you folks have the bigger type buses that do have air brakes, you want to make sure your drivers do not have that L restriction on there because they should not be driving that vehicle. And then the O restriction wouldn't apply to you guys. That's for tractor trailer combination. Okay, I mentioned the Class E license earlier when I was talking about the smaller vehicles, the 9 to 15. It's not part of the CDL classification. Like I said, it's like a step up from the Class F. I think it's still a 25 question multiple choice test. I'm not 100% confident. I got mine years ago when I was in college. There's no driving portion to it. It's just studying for the Class E portion and then taking the test and you get a Class E license. So if your vehicle does not require a CDL, Missouri drivers are going to have that Class E license. Okay. Let's get into drug and alcohol testing. And for 5307, 5311 recipients, you are under the FTA regulations. Very similar to Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration drug and alcohol, but there are some differences. One of the big differences is all of your drivers driving your vehicles are subject to drug and alcohol testing requirements. The other side of the house, just so you know, is only CDL required. But for you folks, all drivers, no matter the vehicle size, no matter what kind of license is required, they are all considered what they call covered employees and have to have random drug and alcohol testing, pre-employment, the whole 9 yards. So hopefully, since this is a requirement from FTA, you guys are somewhat familiar with this, if not intimately familiar with this, but here's the list of all the different types of drug and alcohol testing. So obviously there's a pre-employment drug, random drug and alcohol, reasonable suspicion, post-accident, return to duty, and follow-up. So we're going to get into these a little bit more here. Pre-employment drug testing, you must have a negative drug test prior to a driver operating the vehicle. Does not mandate pre-employment alcohol. You can do that if you so choose, but if you're going to pre-employment alcohol test, you must do it for everyone and not just pick and choose certain drivers. But pre-employment drug test is required for everyone. The random testing, the testing rates now is 50% for drugs, 10% for alcohol. It's been that way. Well, there may be 1 or 2 years where the drugs dropped down to 25%, at least for Federal Motor Carrier. I'm not sure about FTA. But in all my going on 18 years doing this now, it's pretty much been 50 and 10% for the most part. But quite simply, hopefully you're familiar with this. Drivers are in a random testing pool. They're a scientifically valid method to pick them. Everyone has an equal chance of being selected every testing period, which can be on a quarterly basis. It could be on an every 2-month basis, whatever the consortium chooses. And then the drivers are selected for drug and or alcohol or possibly both, and they're sent for their testing. The reasonable suspicion, this is where a supervisor or some other authorized company official has gone through the 60 minutes of training on drug use and 60 minutes of training on alcohol misuse to detect if a driver might be under the influence of one or both. And if they have that training and they observe certain behavior, then you can send that driver for reasonable suspicion testing. All right, substance abuse professional, we call them SAP. This is where we're getting into the return to duty and follow-up testing. This is if you have a driver that tests positive or refuses to submit, which is considered a positive, or any conduct prohibited with Part 655. They're referred to as, first of all, you can have a zero tolerance policy, and that's fine. Whatever your policy says, if it's zero tolerance, you can let them go, that's fine. But if you want to maintain that driver, they have to be pulled from their driving duties or any safety sensitive function, as they call it, and be referred to a substance abuse professional for evaluation. And the SAP's going to recommend education and or treatment. Once that treatment is completed, the SAP will do another evaluation to make sure they have successfully completed it. And then at that time, the SAP will say, okay, this driver is ready for a return to duty test. Once the driver has a negative return to duty test, then he or she can begin driving again. But there is a minimum of 6 follow-up tests within 12 months. The SAP is going to recommend how many follow-ups and the duration. They can recommend more than that. They can go more than 12 months. I think they may be able to go, I have to refresh my memory. up to possibly even 5 years. I've never seen that, but they do have that discretion. The number of follow-ups and the number of months to get them done in is at the SAP's discretion. And the employer, if you have a driver within this return to duty follow-up process, it's on you to determine when those are going to happen. They need to be reasonably spread out. They can't be predictable as to when they're going to happen. But that's where you as the employer has a responsibility to make sure these tests are being done. All right, let's get into accidents. So we're going to get into post-accident testing now. So this is the definition of accident from Part 655, your drug and alcohol section. It's an occurrence associated with the operation of a vehicle if, as a result, an individual dies or an individual suffers bodily injury and immediately receives medical treatment away from the scene of the accident, or one or more vehicles, including non-MPTA funded vehicles, incurs disabling damage as a result of the occurrence in such vehicle or vehicles that are transported away from the scene by a tow truck or other vehicle. All right, so these are your scenarios that meet the definition of an accident. So when is post-accident required? Fatal accidents, post-accident drug and alcohol test all the time. Hopefully you'll never encounter this. On the non-fatal accidents, where you have the bodily injury or the tow truck, post-accident test, unless you as the employer determines with all the information you have at the time that the employee's performance can be completely discounted as a contributing factor to the accident. So let's say your driver's sitting at a red light, stopped legally, supposed to be stopped, red light or stop sign, what have you, and someone just rear ends your driver. I think that's a black and white situation where you can say, my employee was in the right place at the right time, being lawful, and someone just was distracted on their phone and rear ended them. I can completely discount that my driver was not a contributing factor to this accident. Then you do not have to test, obviously. But however, you need to document in detail. Anytime you're not going to test, document the decision-making process. Use to read that decision, not to test. Okay, there's a timeline on post-accident testing. If required to post-accident test, it's for both alcohol and drugs. If for whatever reason you cannot have an alcohol test conducted within 2 hours from the time of the accident, and that's, let's be real, the driver may not be released from the scene for more than 2 hours, depending on the circumstances. Just document why that test cannot be done within 2 hours. And if for whatever reason you cannot get it done within 8 hours, then you cease to attempt getting the alcohol test. For drugs, you have more time. You have a 32-hour window to get the drug test completed. Okay. Part 655 also has an anti-drug use and alcohol misuse program. The big thing to this is a policy statement. And when you guys get this slide deck, that 49 CFR 655.15, that's a hyperlink. You can just click on that. It'll take you right to the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, where you can look up at the requirements of the policy. I think it's A through J or something. There's quite a bit of information you have to have in that policy. So you want to make sure to review that. And your current policy has everything required in it based off of that regulation. And then if you want to add to it to tailor it to make it your own, like a zero tolerance policy, you can certainly do that. But at minimum, you want to check that 49 CFR 655.15 and go down the list to make sure you've covered everything in that policy statement. And it's written out and it's provided to the driver. You guys have an education and training program for your drivers, minimum of 60 minutes of training on the effects and consequences of prohibited drug use. Reasonable suspicion, Barry talked about that. A supervisor or other authorized company official that is in contact with the drivers and can observe them needs to have the 60 minutes on physical behavioral performance indicators of drug use, and the same thing for alcohol misuse. And then if you have that training, then you can send the driver for reasonable suspicion testing if you suspect they are under the influence of drugs and or alcohol. Okay. That is drug and alcohol section. Now we're going to move on to driver qualification. General driver qualifications to operate in Missouri intrastate. must be at least 18 years of age, and you have to be 18 years of age to get the Class E license anyhow. If you're going across state lines, driver has to be 21. Read and speak English. This is not a new regulation. It's got a lot of attention lately with our current administration, and it's being enforced a lot more than it used to, but that's always been in the regulations. Drivers must be able to read and speak English to converse with law enforcement officials and read road signs in English. Know how to safely operate the commercial motor vehicle. Be physically qualified, and we're going to talk about medical certificate or DOT physical here in a little bit. Possess a current valid commercial motor vehicle operator's license, CDL or Class E, whatever the vehicle requires. And I should back up. If you're driving a vehicle that doesn't require a Class E, you can have a CDL, anything above. So Class A can drive Class B, C, E, B can drive C, E. So it's okay to have a CDL and drive a vehicle that doesn't require a CDL, obviously. A driver cannot be disqualified. I don't have a slide on disqualifying offenses. Just know that there are some offenses out there. DWI, DUI is the most common one. Leaving the scene of an accident, where if the driver is convicted, that is considered a commercial motor vehicle disqualifying offense, and they cannot operate a commercial motor vehicle. Successfully complete a driver's road test with you, the employer, or the equivalent to that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that down the road here. Okay, for all of your drivers, you must have a driver qualification file back in the office that's going to have everything that's on this slide here. The application for employment, and I'm sure all of you have applications on all of your drivers. However, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations has specific requirements on their application, specifically driving experience, accident record for the past 3 years, traffic convictions or forfeitures, previous employer history for 3 years for non-CDL and 10 years for CDL, as well as questions about were you subject to DOT regulations with this employer, were you subject to drug and alcohol testing with this employer. So the application you currently have may or may not have everything DOT wants to see. I provided Travis with some supporting documents to go with this presentation. And a lot of the stuff you're going to see on this slide, application for employment being one of them, there is a 2-page application that you can feel free to use or at least reference to see if your application has all the right questions being asked on it. So that will be provided to you as well as this entire slide deck. So that's application for employment. You're also required to do a previous employer check. The fancy word they call this is inquiry to previous employers. So this is to check up on the driver's accident history. And actually, I didn't put on there, but it's also checking on drug and alcohol history if they were subject to drug and alcohol testing with their previous employers. So you're going back on that application, the second page of that application. When you get it, you'll see it asks the specific questions. Were you subject to drug and alcohol testing? So you're going to go back 3 years, a 3-year history. If the driver wasn't subject to DOT regulations or drug and alcohol testing, then there's nothing to really check on, but you do still have to document in the driver file that basically it's not applicable. So if you ever get subjected to an audit or anything down the road, we'll know not to look for that because you already addressed it. Driver's driving record check, also known as an MVR. You get this from the Department of Motor Vehicles. This must be run at least annually. And I'll tell you why it's at least, because it may have to be run more than that. The easiest way to get this is you can have your driver go to the DMV and request it. There is a fee with it. I don't know what it is now. It used to be around $7 or something. Or you can get it yourself, but you have to have your driver sign a statement authorizing you to get that for the DMV to release that to you. But this is just looking at the driving record, making sure they have a valid license. For the CDL drivers, it's actually going to have their medical certification information on it as well. But it's also going to list any crashes or convictions, moving violation convictions it's a 3 or 10-year history. I don't remember exactly, but this must be run upon employment and then every year thereafter, at least every year thereafter. And the annual review of the driving record, this is another document you're going to have in those supporting documents that's going to be emailed to you. This is just you signing off, saying that you, a company official, actually reviewed the MVR. So you didn't just get it and file it away. You actually looked at it to see if there's anything on there that throws up a red flag. Um, DOT regulations is silent on if you do see some convictions or something. As long as they have a valid license, it's up to you how you want to handle if you see some stuff in there that's kind of alarming to you. If you want to counsel the driver, if they get some speeding violations, convictions on there, it's up to you how you want to handle that. But the review of the driving record, there's a document that just says, okay, yes, I got the MVR. Yes, I looked at it. Got a valid license. Good to go. For your CDL driver, got a valid medical card on file. And okay, there's no issues, or well, here's an issue and here's what we did about it. That's totally up to you guys how you want to handle that. The road test certificate or equivalent. Okay, so the equivalent to a road test, if a driver has a CDL, FMCSA says you can just copy their CDL, and that's the equivalent to a road test. They had to take a skills test to get that CDL in the first place. However, I encourage and recommend you go ahead and do a road test yourself anyway, just to make sure you're comfortable with that driver operating your equipment. There are some examples of road tests that you're going to be provided. And it's basically, showing they know how to safely operate the vehicle, know how to back it up, operate it in traffic. There's a lot of stuff on the road test that isn't going to apply to you. Coupling and uncoupling, because you don't have trailers, that won't apply. Stuff with clutches if it's an automatic. So on these examples you're going to be getting for this road test, check off what applies, and obviously if it doesn't apply, it's NA. And then when you're comfortable with the road test, there's a certification of road test document that you keep in the file. This is a one-time test, doesn't have to be done on an annual basis. It can be done in-house. You don't have to hire a third party to do it. The regulations simply state a licensed, competent driver will administer the road test. So you can have somebody in-house do that for you. Okay, medical examination, DOT physical. I think I'm just going to go to the next slide. Well, okay. I put on there proof of the current medical exam for your CDL drivers. That's tied to their CDL, and it's going to be on their MVR. So when you run their MVR, you're going to see, let's say, Class B valid CDL, no convictions, no crashes, but you'll see medical certification information on there. And it needs to be current, obviously. Now, I said the MVR has to be run at least annually. But let's say you have an MVR that's not due to be run again until, I don't know, August of this year. But the driver's medical card expired, and he or she got a new medical card last month. Proof of the medical card for audit purposes, if we come in and do an investigation or audit on your company, in that driver file, we need to see a current MVR with the current medical information on it. So you may have to run it before it's actually due. Okay. That's just for your CDL drivers. If you have non-CDL drivers, proof of the medical card is the medical card itself, because they don't tie the medical card to a non-CDL driver's license. So let's talk a little bit more about the medical card. First and foremost, the regulations say all drivers of commercial motor vehicles must be medically qualified, have that DOT physical. It has to be performed by a licensed medical examiner. These are examiners that are trained by FMCSA, registered, and they have to have recurring training to maintain that status. It used to be back in the day when I started, any doctor could do a medical for a DOT physical. FMCSA realized, well, maybe we need to get a little bit more stringent with this, so they created a National Registry of Certified Medical Examiners. And there's a hyperlink there to take you to the website of where you can search for these medical examiners. You can punch in your address, zip code, do a 5, 10, 15-mile radius, and you can find a medical examiner that's certified to do these DOT physicals. Now, there is an exemption. I said Missouri adopted the federal regulations. I believe I said that earlier. We have a few exemptions to the federal regulations. Here is one here, that if you have a driver that was licensed in the state of Missouri as a chauffeur to operate commercial motor vehicles on May 13th of 1988. That's the magical date where Missouri adopted the federal regulations. They give an exemption to those drivers where they do not have to have that medical card DOT physical if they had that license on May 13th of 1988. So some of your, dare I say, older drivers, I can say that because I'm 50, they may get this exemption. Now, It's up to you if you want to allow them to use that exemption, or I don't know if under the grant you still have to have it or not, but they do get a break with state statute here if they had that chauffeur's license on May 13th of 1988. All right, so let's talk about how that medical certification process works. Used to be, and this is for CDL drivers only, okay? So drivers that have CDLs, it used to be drivers would go get their DOT physical from a medical examiner and physically take their medical card to the DMV to have it married to their CDL, if you will. Around April of last year, I can't believe it's already been more than a year, Missouri, it was mandated in June, but Missouri did it a couple months early. April of 25, Missouri implemented the where the medical exam automatically electronically transmits. So what happens is the driver goes to a medical examiner on that national registry. The driver or the medical examiner's office will enter the results of that medical DOT physical saying, yes, meets qualifications for 2 years or meets it for 1 year, what have you. That will be electronically transmitted to the National Registry by midnight the following business day. And then the National Registry will turn around and transmit it to Missouri DMV. Again, this is for CDL holders only. So when a driver goes in to get a DOT physical, you should know, okay, in a few days here, I need to check to make sure that hit the CDL by running the MVR. Okay. And then you meet the qualifications for providing proof of that medical card for your CDL drivers. There has been some issues in the past where there's been issues with the transmittal. I think a lot of these wrinkles have been ironed out. At least I hope so. If for some reason driver gets the medical exam and it does not get married up to the CDL, contact the medical examiner's office first and have them look to see if they received some kind of error. If they don't enter information exactly as it matches on the driver's license, it's not going to go through, and they should get a kickback error saying they need to resubmit it. If they got it and didn't follow through, then it's never going to hit the CDL. So call the medical examiner's office, see if they had any errors on this specific driver, and if they did, have them fix it and resubmit it, and hopefully it'll go swimmingly from that point forward. If they said, no, we didn't get anything, everything's good on our end, contact SDLA, State Driver's Licensing Agency. That's the DMV. Contact Missouri DMV. They can see if they have any errors they can see on their end. Sometimes it gets hung up for whatever reason. I don't know all the specifics. As a last resort, there's an email for FMC tech support and a phone number that you can contact to see what the hangup is. So hopefully you won't run into any issues, but we have had some in the past, and I think it's gotten a lot better. Okay, so that was it for driver qualification. Now we're going to get into vehicle markings. I mentioned this on a slide previously. If you have a USDOT number, your USDOT number, legal name, or your trade name, DBA, needs to be displayed on both sides of the vehicle. There's no specific size. It's just legible from 50 feet away when the vehicle is stationary. That can be pretty subjective, I know, but use your best judgment there. If you don't have a USDOT number, again, Missouri state statute does have a requirement that the company name must be displayed in a conspicuous place. And it says the address too. And I'll be honest, a lot of times we don't see this, and I don't know really if it's enforced, but technically by letter of the law, you should have your name, and your address doesn't have to be your whole number address. It can just be, St. Louis, Missouri, Springfield, Missouri, what have you. So by letter of the law, you are supposed to have that city or town plus Mo, as well as your legal name. Okay. Accident register for your 9 to 15 under 10,000 folks. This does apply to you. One of the few things it does. So when is an accident register required to be completed? You'll notice this is the definition of accident in the federal motor carrier safety regulations. It's very similar to what you guys have in Part 655 for drug and alcohol post-accident, just a little bit worded differently. So if there's a fatality, bodily injury as a result of the injury, immediately receives medical treatment away from the scene, or one or more motor vehicles incurring disabling damage as a result of the accident requires them to be towed away. One or more of those circumstances is considered a DOT reportable accident and must be maintained on an accident register for 3 years from the date of the accident. So, what has to be on the accident register at minimum? Date of the accident, city or town, or most near where the accident occurred, state where it occurred, driver name, number of injuries, number of fatalities, and whether hazmat was released. Other than if fuel, gasoline, diesel is leaking out from fuel tanks, that doesn't count as hazmat being spilled. They're talking about if you're carrying hazmat as cargo being spilled. I believe in the supporting documents, I did provide an example. Yes, I did, of the accident register. And that's kind of what it looks like right there. This actually has a little bit more information than is required. It's got citation issue, yes or no. But feel free to use that. And all of the documents I'm going to be providing you, or Travis will, at the conclusion of this. It's in our safety and compliance manual. If you've never been to our website, I have a link to the safety and compliance manual on the last slide, as well as my contact information. That's the manual is what we use to educate motor carriers on the regulations, like what I'm doing now. I like to call it the Cliff Notes version of the regulations. They're complicated enough as it is, so we try to simplify it. So all these documents that you're going to be getting in an email are also in the safety and compliance manual on our website, which will be on the last slide of this presentation. Okay, let's talk a little bit about safe driving. Pretty much should be common sense stuff here. Drivers of commercial motor vehicles cannot possess or be under the influence of any Schedule 1 substance. Marijuana is still a Schedule 1 substance at the federal level. So since we're adopting federal regulations, we look at it as being a Schedule 1, even though here in Missouri it's legal for recreational purposes and medical purposes. If I would strongly encourage you to tell your drivers to stay away from the CBD. CBD is supposed to not have the level of THC in it that would cause you to test positive on a drug test. And I'm going back to drug testing now. But I have taken a couple calls over the years. I don't know if it's true or not. Swear up and down that they never smoked marijuana, never took a gummy. They just use CBD for arthritis, and they tested positive for marijuana. The Department of Transportation has made it very clear that there's zero tolerance. There's no excuses. If you're positive for THC, you're positive for THC, and you have to go through the whole return to duty process, regardless of how that happened. So all that to say, encourage your drivers to stay away from that CBD stuff. It's not regulated by the FDA. Nobody really knows how much THC is in it because of that. So I would steer clear of it. Obviously, drivers cannot take an amphetamine, narcotic drug, or be under the influence, or any substance which renders a driver incapable of safely operating a motor vehicle. Legal prescriptions is allowed, again, if they don't affect the driver's ability to safely operate the motor vehicle. And of course, with alcohol, they cannot possess, use, or be under the influence of alcohol. No alcohol 4 hours prior to operating a commercial motor vehicle. And I believe in part 655, it says obviously a .04 is positive in a commercial vehicle. But a .02, it's not positive, but the driver can't drive at the .02. In part 392 of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, which we adopt, it actually says no measured alcohol concentration, period. So take that with what you will. All right, for passenger vehicles, railroad crossing, all buses must stop, listen, look in both directions for a train. Obviously, seatbelts must be worn by all drivers. We already talked about the prohibition on texting and handheld mobile use device. Hands-free is permissible, but once again, you can't be reaching for that phone. It has to be within reach. It's just one touch to answer, one touch to hang up. You can't be dialing numbers or texting. Excuse me. A lot of folks you'll see wearing like the Bluetooth in their ear, and they can just touch it to answer and touch it to hang up. That's fine. Okay. Get into hours of service. We're actually going along a lot faster than I thought, so we'll have time for questions, which is good. Hours of service is pertaining to, like I said in the beginning, how many hours a driver can be on duty or be driving before they have to take some time off. And the whole idea behind this, the reason why we have the regulations, obviously, is because we don't want drivers to be driving while they're fatigued. Right out of the gate, the regulations say everybody must have an electronic logging device until you get exempt from it. I'm going to venture to guess you guys are probably all exempt from the electronic logging device. because you're going to get what they call a short haul operation. So if your operation is limited to within a 150 air mile radius and your driver returns back to work within 14 hours of starting their day, then you get what's called a short haul operation. And you still have to keep track of the driver's time. You still have to make sure the driver is not driving over the maximum on duty time. But you're exempt from having to do an electronic logging device, which plugs into the vehicle, keeps track of when the wheels are moving and when you're on duty, when you're off duty. Um, you just have to keep track of time, showing a timesheet where start time, end time, total hours on duty for each day. So I do have an example of that here, and that's going to be in your supporting documents as well as our safety compliance manual. Um, Again, you come on at 6 o'clock in the morning, you're done at 2, just put 6 o'clock, 2 o'clock total hours on duty and call it good. So you're still not exempt from maximum on duty driving time, even though you're on a timesheet. So how many hours can you drive? 10 hours. That's the maximum you can, and this is not consecutive. It could be broken up. So you can drive 2 hours here, take an hour off, drive 2 hours here, take an hour off. If you drive past 10 hours, then you're in violation of the 10-hour driving rule. Okay. What resets that 10 hours for passenger carriers is 8 consecutive hours off. Once a driver gets 8 consecutive hours off, that 10-hour resets. There's also a 15-hour on duty time. This is all the time, not just driving, but also just if you're working, doing a pre-trip or, you clocked in, but you haven't started driving yet, that time counts against this 15 hours. And again, the 8 consecutive hours off will reset that. There's something called a 60-hour, 70-hour. In order to use the 70-hour rule, you have to operate every day of the week. Otherwise, you're on the 60-hour. The difference is, obviously, besides 60 and 70, is 60 is looking at a 7 consecutive day period. 70 is looking at an 8 consecutive day period. So if you have on-duty time, so driving and on-duty not driving, and you hit 60 hours in a 7 consecutive day period, once you drive past that 60th hour, if you do drive past that 60th hour, then you're in violation of the 60-hour rule. Drive past the 70th hour in 8 consecutive day period, then you're in violation of the 70-hour rule. What you have to be careful of is if you have drivers, let's say they just work maybe 2, 3, 4 hours a day for you. If they have other employment somewhere else, even though they're not working for you, those hours do count as on duty time because it has to deal with fatigue, right? So if they're working a night shift somewhere and then come on early in the morning with you, they've got hours against them already. So it's incumbent upon you as the employer to let your driver know if they do have employment with other employers to let you know that, and you have to track how many hours they work for that employer as well. And some of this, yeah, it's on the honor system. I get it. But you have to show your due diligence that you're checking to make sure that they have enough hours that they can still work for you and not be fatigued. Okay. Let's get into vehicle maintenance. All your vehicles must have a maintenance file, and here are the requirements to be in that maintenance file. Number one is to identify the vehicle the maintenance file is for. Some of you may have 2, 3, 5, 6, 10 vehicles. I don't know. We need to know what maintenance file we're looking at here. So identification of the vehicle, including the company number. If you have company numbers, you're not required to, but if you do, you want to identify the maintenance file with the company number, the make, the VIN, the year, and the tire size. I always get questions, why do we have to have the tire size on there? I never have a clear answer for you, but that is a DOT requirement. This maintenance file can be a physical file. It can be a binder. It can be electronic, like an Excel spreadsheet. But however you have it, make sure you have all identifying information either on the front side or if it's electronic, up at the top somewhere. Within that maintenance file, you need to have a preventive maintenance schedule. You don't have to, but you can follow just what the manufacturer says on the preventive maintenance schedule, or you can have your own. It's really up to you as long as you are showing that you're taking the time to make sure that vehicle is safe to operate, and you're actually following that preventive maintenance schedule, because the next thing you have to have is the actual work that is done. So whatever preventive maintenance is done, you have to keep track of the repairs that were done, the date, what was done. And obviously, unfortunately, but obviously, you're going to have some repairs that are not in your preventive maintenance. You need to keep track of that as well. So again, no standard form for this. You can do it on a binder. You can do it on a notebook. You can do it, whatever works for you, electronically, however it works. For passenger carriers, which you all are, you also have to have documentation of inspecting those emergency exits. They must be tested at least every 90 days and documented when it was tested. I would recommend testing it more than that, but at minimum, they have to be tested every 90 days at those push out windows. With the emergency exits in St. Louis, where I'm at, we do every once in a while, we'll go to the airport and inspect the airport shuttle buses that go from the parking garages to the airport. And the most common violation we see is the emergency exit markings, because those buses are sitting out in the heat and all kinds of weather. It's that sticky plastic. It loses its adhesiveness. Sometimes those stickers fade, but the emergency exit must be clearly marked and must have instructions on how to operate. And sometimes, quite frankly, the passengers will just start, messing with them, and they'll curl up. So check your emergency exit, not just that they're working, but also that those markings are legible or in place and haven't fallen off or peeled off. Okay, in addition to the maintenance file for all your vehicles, you also have to have a what they call a federal annual inspection. This is a DOT inspection, required at least every 12 months. This is in addition to the Missouri State Safety Inspection that you have to get done to renew your plates. All right. They check a lot of the same things, but currently you have to have both a federal annual inspection and a state safety inspection. There's been some legislative proposed, I'm not sure if it went anywhere, where if you're a commercial motor vehicle requiring a federal annual, you won't have to get a state safety. I'm not sure if that's going to go through and pass, but as it stands right now, as I speak to you today, you do have to have both a DOT inspection and a state safety inspection. Now, where you get the DOT inspection is up to you. There's commercial garages out there that have certified DOT inspectors. You may have your own in-house mechanics, depending on the size of your operation, and they may be certified to do DOT inspections. I didn't put that document in my supporting documents, but there is a self-certification form in our safety and compliance manual where a mechanic that's working in-house can self-certify that they meet one or more of the requirements to do a federal annual inspection, and you can do them yourself. Okay, drivers, you have a responsibility for ensuring the vehicle is safe to operate on the roads, called a pre-trip inspection. Oftentimes, the pre-trip inspection is documented. And I think maybe for you guys being grant recipients, it might be required. I'm not 100% on that. But DOT doesn't require the pre-trip to be documented, ironically. They just require that it is done. The post-trip is what's required to be documented if defects are found. And the pre-trip and post-trip is a walk around looking at all the same components. With the post-trip, if a defect is found, it must be documented on a post-trip inspection report signed off by the driver. And then there's a spot for whoever repaired it to sign off it was repaired. And then the next day, the next trip driver, which could be the exact same driver that found the defect, will sign off indicating the repair was made. There can be situations, and I've seen situations where all three signatures are the same driver because it was an easy repair that the driver was able to do, replace a light bulb or something like that. So the driver signs off that this light's not working. Driver fixes it, signs off it's repaired. The next day, signs off that it's, yep, still repaired. So that likely could happen. So here's all the components that need to be looked at on both the pre-trip and the post-trip. You're not a diesel mechanic getting in the weeds or anything. It's just very high level, making sure these components are in good working order, and signing off that they're good. If now the post-trip is required to be documented if a defect is found. If no defect is found, it does not have to be documented. You can make it a requirement anyhow to say no defects were found, just to have a record that it was done. And that is the conclusion. So we have plenty of time for Q&A here. I got through that a lot faster than I thought. So again, here is my contact information. I welcome you to reach out to me at any time. I've gotten several questions from the last three presentations I did that wasn't quite as deep as a dive as this one was. Um, so I welcome you to, and I expect you to reach out to me because this is pretty complicated stuff and it can be very confusing. So,
All right, Matt, thanks so much for all that great information. I don't see any questions in the chat right now. So if you've got one, throw one in there. Otherwise, Matt, what I'll do is I'll just collect them from folks when I send out that email, or like you said, they can reach out to you directly via your
yep.
email address. And I'll make sure to copy you on that note I send to everyone, the supporting documents and that PowerPoint presentation.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt, and thanks to everybody for joining us this morning. We'll give you a little bit of your morning back today. And again, expect an email from me with additional information and look for the next MPTA Education Series event. And everyone, make it a great day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you guys. Appreciate you attending.